And hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pumpkin Copter Cast, the only video game show. So today I am joined by Thomas of Pixellicker here to talk about the latest game he is working on.
Hi there.
So we'll start with just an introduction of you, if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, my name's Tom, but I go in the industry by Reggie usually because I had a bunch of friends named Tom growing up, so they kind of gave me a pseudonym. Um, I started my company back in 2012, and I've actually worked in AAA games since 2000. I started out at Capcom and worked on Maximo 1 and 2 as an environment artist. And then I switched over to EA and worked on My Sims. And then I switched over to a couple more independent studios and worked on some licensed stuff. And then I ended up at a mobile game company called the Playforge and did a few titles over there. And then got a breakout hit in my spare time called Slayin. And since then, I've gone independent and I've been working on mobile games. And now I'm working on my first big PC game, which is actually the sequel to Slayin, Slayin 2.
Okay, and when did you first become interested in video games?
Oh God, probably when I was like 5 or 6, my dad bought an Atari 2600, and from that point forward, like I was either in arcades or at home playing the Atari. And then, when a Nintendo came around, I got one for Christmas, and then pretty much have bought every console generation since, up until the current one. I actually don't have a current gen console except a Switch. I guess that's current gen. But yeah, I've owned everything except for a Super Nintendo. That's the only console I never ended up buying. I had a Genesis and never could afford more than one console because that was like my high school and college years. So, but I love my Atari.
Okay. And what would you say is your favorite game and or games growing up?
Uh, Geez, I mean, every system there was probably a different set of games, but I was definitely a fan of Capcom stuff. They were a big influence on me early on, and since I spent a lot of time in arcades, I played a lot of Capcom and Konami arcade games. Um, Bionic Commando was a big one on the NES, and I love the arcade version of it too. I really liked beat 'em up games throughout my high school and college years, and fighting games. So I played a lot of Street Fighter. I played a lot of Final Fight, a lot of Alien Predator, like that kind of era of gaming. Like I really love the colorful big sprites of Capcom's arcade era. Um, I even got me to collect arcade cabinets when I got older. I'm proud to say I'm a Forgotten Worlds cabinet owner. I love that game, and I've collected a lot of Capcom beat 'em ups for arcade cabinets.
Okay, and what would you say is your favorite game and or games now?
Um, I don't know that I really have a favorite right now. I mean, I still like to play a lot of old arcade boards, and I like to play on MAME. Um, I play a lot with my daughter now. We're now replaying Breath of the Wild, so I've been kind of having a resurgence of getting back into the Switch because I didn't really play too much on the Switch after the initial launch. I played Zelda all the way through, and then now she's starting to play it, and it's getting me back into playing it. So at the moment, I spend a lot of time when I'm playing games on the side. I end up playing Breath of the Wild more than anything. The last new release I probably played was Monster Boy on the Switch,
Mm-hmm.
which I also loved a lot. Um, and I have a pretty big back catalog of stuff that I haven't gotten to because I end up developing more than I end up playing these days, unfortunately. But I love making games so much that it's really hard to like find the time to set aside time for me just to enjoy other people's work. But
Okay, and you've mentioned you've been in the game industry for quite a while now, so what made you want to get into game design, and how did that lead you into like working for AAA and then for a smaller company and then for your own?
Um, well, I started out going to art school to be an illustrator, and then right before I graduated, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and I had taken a class in comic book design, and my teacher in that realized that I was really into games, so he asked why I didn't just apply to the game industry. So I decided to take a chance, and I applied to a bunch of game industry like leaders back in the day, not really knowing what they were looking for or what my portfolio needed. And this was like back in the 90s, so this was when you had to like mail everything out, and there was no real internet connectivity yet with any of the companies, so it wasn't easy to email stuff. So I kind of got in right before the big internet boom happened, and I got a reply from Capcom, and I was super excited about that. But I didn't really know what they were looking for, so I had just learned 3D stuff in my spare time and done a lot of concept art, and just kind of sent everything at them and said, "Do you have anything?" And they were nice enough to bring me out to California, and I got into there, and I thought that was going to be my job for the rest of my life. And then I found out after about 6 years they closed the studio, and that's when I found out exactly how the AAA industry worked and realized that everything is short term when you get a job at a big company. There is no company that's like completely safe from shutting down studios or laying people off. So I went to EA because that was the next thing that had a job opening. And I kind of bounced around between companies because you're just sort of looking for what the next thing is, not necessarily because they're making a game that you want to work on, or you just kind of want to keep your skills sharp and you want a paycheck. So after doing that, for 3 or 4 jobs, I got into mobile because mobile actually at the time was starting to do stuff like I was doing on console. They were doing a lot more 3D work, and there's actually more chance to do 2D work, which was where my passion was. And after I got there, I realized that making mobile games in your spare time really was an option because there were easy tools to work with. And at that time, I got into Multimedia Fusion, which is the engine I use to make my games. And it allowed me as an artist to do code stuff, which I'm just terrible at doing actual like real coding. Like I can't work in code syntax very well. I'm terrible at doing typing errors and stuff. So I I have a hard time reading code, and Multimedia Fusion let me read code and understand like code logic without having to learn how to type code. So I sort of self-taught myself code design and asked lots of questions of my coworkers who were programmers and designers and sort of built up my skill set that way. And then when I had enough of a hit that would support me, I went independent and I haven't looked back.
Okay, and now we can move on to the meat and potatoes of this interview. So, if you were at like PAX or as I discovered you at Boston Fig Fest of last year, and someone walked by, how would you give them the rundown for what Slayin 2 is?
Uh, well, it's a action game where you're a little knight who runs back and forth and tries to slay as many enemies as possible. So the idea is that you're in a single screen, you're fighting off a big horde of enemies, and as long as you can survive through it and kill them in the most flashy and fun and stylish ways possible, you gain money and fame, and then your character can improve their status in life with their fame and their money. And as you get more famous, you can recruit more people, or more people will want to join your cause, and you get more playable characters, and then you can use them to increase your fame too. So maybe that was more than an elevator pitch, but that's the gist of the game. And where the original game was a mobile game, it was just a simple arcade single screen kind of action game. The second game is more of a adventure game where you actually go from area to area on a map, and you uncover new areas and you visit towns, and you can increase your weapons and upgrade your weapons, and find new people. And it isn't so much of like a earn in-game currency, unlock stuff with your in-game currency. Now it's actually like more tied to your progress in the game. And there's an ending in the game now, whereas Slayin was kind of an endless game. This game has a definitive start and end. And each area records scores. So you can play for score, or you can play for fame, or you can grind level for more stuff if you want. So there's a lot more options for the player this time around.
Okay. So, when you mentioned that, Slayin has a more traditional campaign structure than the first Slayin, did you just see that as a natural progression if you decided to make a sequel to it, or was there any other factor that made you decide to slightly push away from the arcadey endless style of the first Slayin?
Yeah, I mean, I decided early on I didn't want to do mobile. I wanted to do something where I had a physical controller or keyboard so that I could work with more buttons. Because the original Slayin was designed around the idea that I don't think mobile games work very well when they have more than one input. And so I made the game a single button, which presented a lot of challenges, but those challenges sort of made me design more interesting ways of doing combat. Whereas this time around, I said, okay, I'm going to give myself more buttons, but not too many more buttons. So I gave the player 3 buttons total, and that lets everyone have the ability to jump, and they have an action button where they can do more stuff. And those sorts of new inputs allowed me to do more interesting kinds of combat, create new kinds of enemies that this interesting combat can interact with. So a lot of things did progress sort of from just adding more complexity to the controls. Suddenly I had more things I could ask the player to try to do. But I mean, there is still an arcade roots buried deep in there. I mean, the game still is a very pick it up, play it for a few minutes, and it doesn't take long to beat an area. So you can, just play it in small bits of time, or you can just try to marathon your way through the whole game in one sitting if you want.
Okay. And when I played it at Boston Fig Fest, I immediately saw that in addition to there being more playable characters, the characters also played very differently from the primary guy, which is just a knight with a big old sword and shield. So,
Mm-hmm.
how will some of the characters play differently from the big old sword and shield knight?
Well, the knight is really the just run up and hit stuff character. Um, at the show, I showed the ninja and the wizard, and so the ninja is the weak character but very quick. So in Slayin, the main way to score and to get big fame points is to try and hit enemies as much as possible, and every time you hit them, they release treasure and you earn fame. So some characters actually hit weaker but more. So you can do more flashy stuff because the enemies don't die as quickly. So because they're weaker, they allow you to actually milk enemies for money and fame. So the ninja is one of those kind of characters. The wizard is more of a not a kite character, but like a distance character where you have to try to stay away because all her attacks are more affecting farther away from her. So if enemies getting close to her, then she's at a disadvantage. So you're trying to sort of, you know, herd enemies. There's the archer is making a return, who is also another distance character, but has a much faster rate of fire. So he's more about pegging enemies from a distance in rapid succession. There's a bomb character that can throw explosives, but the explosives have the chance of hurting the player as well. So you have to make sure you throw it and then not be in the blast. There's a lance character that can throw like a jousting lance, and the lance can actually be pulled back to him magically. So he can throw weapons and then sort of like boomerang the weapon back to him. And if he doesn't boomerang it, when he throws the lance, it just lands in the ground and you actually have to go recover it. So you can either grab it by just running up to it and touching it, or you can pull it back to you and be kind of strategic with how you throw your lance and then pull it back through enemies. Let's see. There's a couple secret characters that I won't really reveal yet, um, that have kind of unorthodox play styles that are a little more like run and gun kind of characters, but also have some limitations to them. So like either they're able to shoot quickly or move in dashes, but they move kind of slowly when they're just walking around. So a lot of the characters now have um, different play styles and how they milk enemies for money and for points and for fame. So that's the big difference. Whereas in Slayin 1, the characters I think were more because they only had one button input, the button would actually make them attack very differently. This time around, I mean, all the characters have special attacks they can use, and they sort of they're complementary to their play style. So hopefully people will find characters that really do fit the way they play well. And then some characters are actually better at certain areas than others. Like some characters are better at dealing with air enemies. And so the areas that have a lot more air enemies in them, you'll have more of an advantage if you play a certain character. But that may not yield you as much money or fame. So it's up to the player to kind of figure out which characters work best for them to get through certain areas of the levels.
Okay, how long would you say, like, once Slayin 2 is available for purchasing, like, from beginning of you having the idea to it being released, how long would you say it took to completely make?
Well, the first code was written 2 years ago in December. So the idea is to get the. I'm nearing beta right now. I'm almost feature complete, and then I need to do a testing phase. So it really depends on how long the testing takes. But
Mm-hmm.
my goal is to try to get the game out in May or June. Um, it'll definitely come out this year. So it'd probably be about 2.5 years total. And if I could get funding or find a publisher who could support me to polish it even more, I mean, I would probably put another 6 months into it if I could. But sometimes you just got to know when to say when. That's like the hardest part of game development sometimes.
Okay, as someone who knows literally nothing about making a game, what was like what was the most what was or currently is the most challenging aspect of, making Slayin 2?
Right now, I would say getting the word out is probably the hardest part, which is why I appreciate things like your podcast because it's a different age where I guess if you have a publisher who might have contacts, it's much easier to get people to know your game exists. But when you're just an indie, you're relying on word of mouth and social media. And I have to say, my social media skills need to be leveled up pretty severely. And that was something that I didn't put enough time into early on, and I should have. And now I'm kind of like trying to get the word out as fast as I can. So I would say the hardest part is being a self promoter and a marketer, especially when you're more of a creative type. You want to spend all your time making the game so it's the best it can be, and it's hard to force yourself to spend time on social media just doing the grunt work of getting the word out. But if you're asking what's the hardest part of actually making the game, I kind of find like the challenges of making the game to be the fun part. So I don't really look at it as, this was a difficult part or not difficult part, because that's just kind of what I enjoy about actually game making.
Okay, and on the flip side of that, since you kind of just mentioned it, what is your favorite part of making Slayin 2?
Oh, making the pixel art for sure. I mean, my first love is still being an artist, so I love doing pixel art, and as long as I can keep supporting my family and supporting the development of the next game, I will keep making games with pixel art because I just love it so much. I mean, a lot of people like to do it because it's in vogue, or the retro style thing is in vogue, but for me, I just enjoy pixel pushing. It's just a thing I can sit and do for hours, even if I wasn't making games. So for me, making the pixel art.
Okay, and so what platforms do you plan on releasing Slayin 2 on once it's all set and ready to go?
So my initial goal was to put it on Steam, and that's still the plan. I'm also looking at itch.io, and if I can find publishing or if the Steam version does well enough, I'm going to try to shop it around to get a Switch port, because at Boston Fig there were a lot of people who were really excited at the idea of it being on Switch, especially with the sequel now being multiplayer, which the first game was only single player. It's a very good couch co-op kind of game, so that lends itself really well to the Switch.
Okay then, and hmm. Uh, and what other types of genres would you be interested in dipping into sometime down the road?
Well, I mean, because I have such an arcade background, there's so many old game genres I'd love to do mashups of, or at least explore like mixing genres with old game genres. I've wanted to do a beat 'em up game for a long time, like a belt scrolling game, like a Final Fight kind of game. Um, I would definitely like to do some more like goofy games, because I have a 6-year old daughter and she loves doing design brainstorming ideas with me, and she comes up with some crazy stuff. And there are just some days where I'd love to just write down all the things she says and just come up with some weird game that that uses all of her wacky ideas. But I think I'll always be doing action games. I don't have any interest in doing like turn-based stuff or like heavy strategy games. Um, I think I probably have a platformer in me somewhere. But yeah, definitely want to do a beat 'em up in the if I get enough money to make another game, I already have some ideas to do like weird post-apocalyptic game settings or like space cowboy settings or that kind of thing. Um,
And okay, and the final question, which every guest on my show always understands perfectly, and there's never been any sort of confusion on, in your opinion, is video games.
I would say sometimes.
Okay then. And yes, with that, this particular episode of the Pumpkin Copter Cast has come to a close. I would like to thank Tom for joining me today and talking about his upcoming game.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been loads of fun.
And yeah, for some reason, the -7 people listening to this enjoyed listening to it. You can like and subscribe. You can follow me on the Twitters at tgorman83 if you want. Is there anything you wish to plug before we sign off, Tom?
Sure, you can check out the dev blog for the game if you're interested at pixellicker.com, all one word. And we have a Twitter at Pixellicker.
Okay then. This has been the Pumpkin Coptercast, the only video game show, and I hope all of you have a gourd day.
Oh.